Hello and welcome to Profiles in Risk, and this is your host, Tony Cañas. And today I have with me, and again, this is I think the second time in 3 weeks that I've made this same mistake. I did not ask you how to pronounce your last name, so I'm going to go ahead and butcher it. I have
No, that's okay.
Rick Tighe.
No.
Yeah, no. Managing Director of National Flood Service, or NFS. How do you actually pronounce your last name? And my apologies for not asking.
That's okay. It's Rick Tighe. Everyone gets it. Everyone gets it wrong. I respond to a lot of different variations, but it's Tighe.
Perfect. The funny thing is my last name is Cañas with the ñ in Spanish, and
Right.
nobody can ever pronounce it here in the States. So I very often, when I'm on podcasts or when I speak, I very often get asked how to pronounce it, and I always really appreciate it. And I'm really bad at doing that on my own podcast. So my apologies on that. So Rick, as I was telling you before we started recording, the history of insurance nerds and profiles in risk, we had a lot of young listeners who were new in the insurance industry, and we've grown since then. Now we have a lot of executive listeners too. But I'm always very careful to kind of make sure that the newer listeners understand why what we're talking about is important. So luckily, you happen to be newer at your role at NFS too. So maybe it's good that we're starting from kind of the bottom. But I think it's very important to talk about why flood insurance is so different kind of from the rest of insurance. And the way that I was introduced to flood, basically, when I did my CPCU, at the very beginning of CPCU, like CPCU 500, basically teaches us that flood is catastrophic and as such basically can't be insured in the private market because there's no way to diversify the risk, right?
Right.
So we've had the NFIP or the National Flood Insurance Program.
That's correct.
Has existed for I want to say a couple of decades, maybe more than that.
It has.
And it's wonderful in that it assures coverage, and it's a gigantic mess, as in it's not actuarially sound, and it's in depth to its eyeballs, and basically it's taxpayer funded losing money for the foreseeable future, essentially.
Right. Yeah.
So that's kind of the background against which all of the flood insurance in the States operates. Now there is such a thing as private flood.
That's correct.
And the agencies can sell flood, and not only that, but what I think is fascinating, the carriers can write private flood.
That's correct.
Whether they like there's a write your own program, which I don't really understand. That's like this is the extent of my
that's okay.
of my flood knowledge. So there's a write your own program.
Yeah.
Where they can write, and I think they can keep some of the risk in the write your own program. But I'm not. So anyway, that's kind of the extent of what I know about flood. So now that we kind of introduced why flood insurance is a little bit different, tell me about National Flood Service.
Yeah. Well, I'll back up a little bit because I'm newer to National Flood Services, but not new to the insurance industry. I spent the last 30 years in dealing with property and casualty companies at my previous employer. And what's interesting is that you're 3 times more likely to experience a loss from flood than you are from fire, right? And as you just pointed out, flood is a complicated product. It's not a traditional product when you think of the property and casualty space. There is private product. So the private product in this industry is definitely a growth opportunity. And I think a lot of organizations are looking at how do they leverage private product and how do we get more of the population consuming products like that. But the backbone of the flood insurance industry is the NFIP program. And the products that are represented are underwritten by the federal government. So the federal government and FEMA is the department that administers the program. And we have a very close relationship with FEMA. But less than 5% or maybe around 5% of the population actually is covered, through some flood policy. And some of the stuff's mandated, because if you have a federally backed mortgage on your mortgage for your home, and depending on where you're located in the country, it might be a requirement to have flood insurance, based on the mortgage that you have on your house. So there's a lot of complications. It's a very cumbersome manual process, but it is something that the federal government believes, and we believe that to spread the risk out from a catastrophic event, it makes sense for more of the population to have a policy like this, and it doesn't naturally apply to the actuary services that you traditionally see in the property and casualty space. But there's a lot of movement that's happening at the federal government to actually put that in place. So what NFS does, I can get into NFS really quickly too, is that I look at us. I mean, we're a lot of things. We're essentially, our core service is a third-party administrator. So what we do is we work with a carrier, and a carrier can apply to the federal government to be what they call a write your own. So a large carrier can actually write flood insurance to their clients on their paperwork. And then what we'll do as an entity, as an administrative entity, we'll manage that. We'll manage from policy administration, underwriting. We'll do first notice of loss. We'll do claim, and we'll do any kind of work as it relates to client engagement. And we'll essentially administer the entire customer experience and agent experience for the carrier.
Gotcha. So basically, your clients are carriers.
That's correct.
Is it carrier underwriting departments, or is it carrier claims departments, or I don't think carrier have like flood departments, or is it carrier personal lines departments, or?
That's a great question, because it's interesting. So typically, it's all of the above, and carriers do have flood departments, actually, and in some cases they're aligned with their personal lines, and in most cases they're aligned with their brokerage services. Just because they don't manufacture the product actually is a federal government product, so they align it with brokerage. But there is a flood department. It's usually small. There's not a lot of people in the department, but those are typically our contacts within our large carriers have some representation in flood. Some carriers are much more aggressive in trying to cross-sell their clients, and flood is a very nice extension of a homeowner's insurance policy, depending on where you are. Every one of us in the United States is in some sort of flood zone, believe it or not, right?
Oh, 100% agreed. And by the way, one advantage that you have on this podcast is that for a long time, this podcast was ran by Nick Lamparelli, who's a flood guy.
Oh, really?
And yeah, Nick is a lifelong catastrophe modeler, and he opened an insurtech MGU called the Rethought Insurance, which is all about flood. So basically, like, our listeners have heard for years how everybody should have flood, period.
Right.
Like everybody has some risk of flood. So on this particular podcast, you have an audience that at least has been introduced to that idea multiple times, and Nick's made a case for and I agree with him. Everybody should have flood, and we eventually need to get to that point, and it's so hard to get there, right? And the more that we get to a point where everybody has flood, that the more that the premium is properly spread.
Exactly, and I think that's the goal of FEMA. So FEMA has, a pretty aggressive marketing program in terms of their position as it relates to what they want to do, and making sure that potential policyholders are informed. They understand that flooding just doesn't happen where the palm trees are. Flooding actually happens in middle America, near rivers, near streams, especially in the spring. And I think if we get a better mix of population that actually has a policy, the rates go down for all Americans. And then also the fact that the federal government is not backing all the responsibility when a catastrophic event occurs. And they they can be quite expensive and devastating, right, to people in the country. So what we can do is, we try to make sure that agents are aware and consumers are aware and understand that, and really we want to try to make the flood policy acquisition business much like something you might have at a retail organization. Really from a customer experience standpoint, what we're trying to get to is we're getting to have that experience to be something maybe not towards the Amazon experience, right? But maybe halfway there, to try to leveraging technology to be able to support the experience, which we think if we can do that, we can get a bigger percentage of population that will consume the product.
So I've had so many conversations about the difficulty of buying insurance, but I've never bought flood myself. I'm not a homeowner. Apartment dweller, 14-story apartments. Oh, and by the way, you're in Montana, if I remember correctly, right?
No, I'm in Wisconsin.
Wisconsin, okay.
Yeah, our corporate headquarters are in Kalispell, Montana. I'm in Wisconsin, and then I do have a property in Florida where I'm a flood insurance owner. So
okay.
I did have to buy flood insurance too. So
okay, I was going to joke that 14 stories is about 3 times as high as the highest building in Montana, but I think Wisconsin actually has some, and Florida definitely does. Anyway, so we agree completely that spreading flood to as many people as possible is a win-win-win. It's a win for the carriers. It's a win for the taxpayer who's not paying those losses later, or brings in enough premium so that everybody's coverage is well priced, right? So we can actually take advantage of large numbers. I remember where I was. I was that I've never bought flood myself. So right now, how is that process? Is that process worse than normal personalized insurance at most carriers today?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the property and casualty space, and I've dealt with it for a long time, I think there's a modernization that's happening in the property and casualty space. So I've read some things that, in the next 3 or 4 years, there'll be more technology change than there has in the last 50 years for property and casualty. So I think
pretty much
you see every
insurance executive agrees, and especially given the incredible influx of insurtech that we've insurtech investment that we've seen come in. Yes, most definitely. Yeah. I don't think anybody. So we completely agree with that. So.
But flood is different. So let me make the point here is that, as you look at what is happening and racing towards the traditional property and casualty lines with sort of, communicate channel of choice, all the different demographics of the new clients they have, in terms of, the millennials to the baby boomers, that whole, tech can help, right? Flood is probably one of the most underserved products as it relates
by far.
to technology. It's not even thought about when you think about, technology automation. So, and that's what we're trying to think about it. NFS is trying to say, let's think about it because it's incredibly underserved. The complication comes from the fact that obviously it's a federal government product. the federal government product, which, you know, I won't make any more comments about, but it's a federal government product. It's a kind of a one size or two size fits all type of philosophy. And there's a lot of complexity. There's elevation differences in terms of, you know, where your house sits. Is it on a slab? Is it raised? You know, where are utilities? You know, and then there's elevation certificates that come into that. It's been, you know, validated that the building sits in this sort of way on the lot, and then there's different zones that come into flood, whether you're in a preferred risk, you know, or you're in a heavy risk, right? And there's different variations of that geographically based, and there's mapping and remapping that happens in this country all the time. So you think about all of that mixture, and then you think about a tech platform that can keep up with that pace. So right now it's all done with paper and people.
Okay.
Honestly.
So we actually haven't discussed it yet, but you mentioned it before we started, but I purposely didn't like dig into it. But I'm assuming that that this is what Trident is. So tell me about Trident.
Sure. Yeah. So Trident is our version of the customer experience tech platform that this industry has been looking for, you know, for a very long time. You know, it's a holistic, web-based, innovative, dynamic application process. So as a agent or a consumer goes in to be able to procure, you know, an insurance policy, and they call them issuing policies in this industry, not binding, but when they issue a policy, it's a software as a service, web-based portal where a client, you know, an insured, you know, a direct-to-consumer, an agent can go in and put in a simple street address, and then based on that street address, have a dynamic application with very few questions, and it has the capability to be able to all on one platform without leaving the technology, procure and issue a policy all in a moments of time.
Okay, gotcha. So basically, if I'm a carrier, be it a small or large carrier, and I've never really done a lot with flood, right? I write my own, but it's a painful process. Most agents don't really follow it through because it's a painful process compared to the rest of my product. You guys can set me up with a front end that I don't have to bring in a new server. It's you know, software as a service to do the flood piece and just kind of take it off my hands.
Right.
Beautiful.
Yes. Yeah. So what we're doing is we're offering it to our clients. We have our first clients on. It's a multi-tenant product. So we can have multi-tenants. So multiple carriers can have their own instance. It can be very personalized from a customer experience or an agent experience. So as they log in and authenticate to the site, there's no real infrastructure change or things that our carriers need to do to change platforms or whatever, because it's a web-based software as a service, and it's the full application. I explained at the beginning. As a third-party administrator, we do all these services for the carriers. So it's not just the issuing of a policy that the platform supports. It is that, because that's the beginning process, right? That's the customer experience. Could I buy online? Could I see my property? Could I get multiple quotes? Could I understand what's included and what's not included all on the platform in an intuitive nature with very few questions? Because if you've ever applied for a policy, I mean, there's 25 questions. There's a lot of questions. This is very few questions to get you started, and then based on how you answer, there might be a series of additional questions. But if you answer a certain way, you move right to procuring a policy, depending on how you set. Now, the technology also supports the whole ecosystem of what we handle for the carrier. It includes policy administration, so our whole operations department is involved. it involves claims, it involves underwriting, it includes first notice of loss. We expect that we can cut turnaround time from the time of first notice of loss to when a claim is paid by 50%. I think the industry is like 29 days. We believe our technology is going to be in the range of 15 days, just because of the fact that we have everything on a intuitive platform design. There's less manual processes. There's less working in multiple systems right now, where it's all going to be right at the claim adjusters and the claims department's purview to be able to go in and close out a claim. So
it's end to end, not
completed.
just. Oh, that's okay. That's beautiful.
Yeah, right. It's not just the onboarding of going onto Amazon and clicking, your checkout, but it has the feel of clicking your checkout to get your policy, but it has all the back end operations to be able to support both the customer experience. And one of the more difficult things, obviously, when you have a catastrophic event, you could be displaced from your home. It could be incredibly stressful, right? And it's a very terrible time for our policyholders, right? So in those moments of time, in those moments of truth, to be able to coordinate this effort and get the first notice of loss and actually pay the claim in a quick fashion, is all part of the customer experience and all part of our responsibility, to our flood community.
Okay. What are the advantages to a carrier to focus a little more on flood? Right. If I'm ex-carrier and I've just never paid much, we have a Write Your Own, but we really have never pursued it. What are the advantages to actually bring you on to give us a good flood experience for our clients?
Yeah. I think that there's a couple that come to mind, and really I think the first logical place to start as it relates to advantage from a carrier is that homeowners insurance is great, right? Most of us have homeowners insurance, or maybe even, most of us have homeowners insurance, right? And part of being a homeowner is that certain things don't necessarily get covered through homeowners insurance, right? With surge of water and rising water levels, and those types of things don't typically are not typically covered under your policy. And from an agent perspective, not all the agents are even aware of that, in terms of, so there's an educational element. But I think to have a client, and a lot of our clients look at net promoter scores. So NPS in the insurance industry is really, really important. It's really a benchmark, net promoter scores, in terms of how our carriers look at how well they're doing with their insured. And I think that if you attach a flood policy on a homeowner's policy, one of our carriers said that their retention rates are much longer. Their customers stay with them much longer because they're satisfied, and their net promoter scores actually go up, because if there is such an event like a flood compared to something that would be a traditional homeowner's insurance claim and they got both ends covered, they get a satisfied client. So I think that's the number one point. The second thing is that when you look at a carrier and you have the government underwriting the policy, and you have more flood insurance, which we call policies in force, we call it PIF in this industry. If you have more policies in force, you're theoretically spreading your risk, because the government is taking the responsibility of the risk, because they're underwriting the claim. It's not the carrier that's underwriting the claim, it's the government. So technically you're spreading your risk and you're diversifying your risk across your entire portfolio. Albeit flood's typically a very small piece, but it does diversify your risk.
Okay. And we are recording on April 6th, right? Kind of the heart of the coronavirus crisis of 2020. Hopefully not the very beginning. Hopefully this won't go on for a long time, but it is having a big effect on everybody. So I am curious, how has the current crisis affected NFS and your clients, and what effect is it having? What are you guys doing about it?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you asked that, because we are right in the middle, of this, and hopefully we're getting to the end, of course, and that's everyone's wishes. But when I looked at NFS, and I look at it from a perspective of that, for 35 years, we've been in the business of responding to situations like catastrophes where people are being displaced from their houses and their homes. Now, on the exact opposite, what we're doing at NFS is, over the last probably 2 months, we've been getting prepared for people to work at their houses. So we've been doing the absolute opposite of what we are kind of built to do. But it's interesting because we're in the industry of really reacting to these types of events, whether it's a hurricane or, a pandemic. Our business continuity plan plays and is designed to do exactly what we did. So, even in the beginning of January, I have to take my hat off to the leadership at this company, and the Peak Six organization in particular, the owners of NFS, that in January we already started to do deep cleaning of our facilities, especially our call centers, where a majority of our population is operation and call in Overland Park in Kalispell. So we did hand washing stations, deep cleaning. Early February, we are already assessing what it would be to move all our people to work from their homes. So we are looking at internet connections, technology that we need to deliver. Did they have a sufficient place to work? Did they have all the right dual monitors in front of them? Can you imagine what operations people need to do, right? So we did that early January, and mid-February, in the sake of 2 weeks, we had almost 98% of our entire workforce working from home in the matter of 2 weeks, and which is amazing. Yeah.
The call center is a virtual call center right now, basically.
Everything, about 98%. There was legacy, very, very small legacy staff, but we probably were the first organization in the industry to completely, go from work from home and execute. And really I just heard from a carrier this morning, in fact, sent me an email, and I won't mention their name, of course, but it's a very large carrier. They said he had to say it was amazing. They just got their SLA, their service level agreement for the month of March, and everything was green, right? There wasn't any leg of service, right? And he said, with what you guys did, we kind of expected there might be a little, kind of up and down or dip. He said there was no dip at all. So he basically said hats off to NFS for what we did. So again, that's a little plug for, but I mean, honestly, we're designed to react when bad things happen. And I think that we understand how to mitigate risk very well.
That's the beauty of our industry. We become experts at managing risks and at reacting
right
when things happen. We always take a little time to talk a little bit about your background. So I looked at your LinkedIn earlier today, and my first thought is, he's not an insurance person. Mm-hmm. He's new to insurance. Although I did notice that at your last role before this one, you served the insurance industry.
Right.
But tell me a little bit about your career. How did you end up serving insurance and then fully joining insurance now?
Yeah. Well, I've always had, I worked for 30 years previous to NFS with really a single company there, through multiple acquisitions. But it's been one employer and in really the technology services industry. So we we performed business process operations services, both on-site and off-site. We did technology implementations. We did work really around automating manual processes. And early in my career, maybe for the last 15 or 20 years, I saw the insurance industry as an industry that was ripe for change and for modernization. And the way that organizations, like firms, like insurance organizations were, is they had multiple silos, and data wasn't federated. It was in different parts of the organization, and home did this, and car did this, and life did this, and should they ever talk or meet, it was an industry that had a tremendous amount of paper flowing in and out of the organization, which is always an indication. When there's paper, there's opportunity. And I ran the practice area probably for 15 years. So I did anywhere from designing content for our sales organization. I had hundreds of people in the sales organization that supported the industry, to building solutions on-site and off-site for the largest carriers in the country. And it really was modernization. And we did focus a little bit much more on inbound and outbound communication, so claims and critical customer communication services. So we tried to use technology automation to be able to support the process so the clients could grow without building infrastructure, bricks and mortar, and people.
So after 30 years of serving the industry as a supplier, what finally made you decide to jump in and like actually join an insurance organization?
Yeah, it was I wasn't looking to move, but when I got a call from NFS and Ralph Blust, who's the CEO of the company, and basically said, hey, take a look. And we're interested in your technology background, what you've done with your carriers. He said, take a look, because we're looking for someone to lead our client engagement team, our marketing team, and our training team. So I have the responsibility of marketing, agent development, and sales for the organization. And I went and had a conversation around, and we really talked about customer experience. I knew about the flood insurance industry and some of the pundits that were talking about the opportunity that presented itself, because it was really an underserved product. And when I saw what NFS was doing in the investment of our new platform called Trident, and the amount of money they were investing, and the vision they had to say that if they really were going to change the industry and almost revolutionize the industry as it relates to, like, our slogan is flood ought to be simple, if you go to some of our websites. And when I looked at the platform, that's really what convinced me, because I don't think this industry is not going to change with blocking and tackling. It really needs to change with a technology modernization focus. And I saw that. So after 30 years with the company, I jumped in, and I started here in January 2nd.
And we're recording 3 months later.
Yeah.
I must say you're holding yourself well. Speaking about flood and NFS, even though you're only been there for a few months, so great job. I am.
I'm drinking through a fire hose. I'm drinking through a fire hose right now, but I with being in our industry for a long time and knowing the personal lines and knowing what most of the carriers were trying to do as it relates to customer experience, it's not all that different here. It's just this whole thing that the insurance industry is trying to become, and that it needs to become, and then embracing some of the insurtechs and understanding that they're not necessarily the competition. They could be the answer, and because of the mass population that they serve, there's some similarities here that are very interesting for me.
Okay. And if Nick was doing the interview, he would definitely given that you're from Wisconsin, he would definitely want to talk a little bit sports.
Yes.
I am the non-sports guy in the group, but I do just happen to like the Packers. I like their model. I like how successful they've been, and I've actually watched the Packers game live. So I've got to ask, how much longer do you think Aaron Rodgers has?
Well, first of all, I'm an owner of the Packers. Obviously, you know they're owned by the.
That's one of the reasons I really like them. The only NFL team still owned by the town.
Yeah.
I go ahead.
Right. No, I bought us. They were selling stock, and you know, when you're born, I'm born and raised in Wisconsin, so
Okay.
it's mandatory. I mean, you'd have to move to Illinois if you didn't like the Packers.
So you have season tickets?
I don't have season.
The wait list is like 35 years.
35 years, but my friends do. I have really
okay.
Some really tight friends that we go to a lot of the home games. I live in an hour and a half from Lambeau Field, from the stadium.
Okay.
I live north of Milwaukee, so I live very close to Lambeau. But so we give Rodgers 2 more years.
2 more years, okay.
Yes, I think that, you know, Aaron. And who knows what will happen this year with play. We're hoping, crossing our fingers, that, you know, we get some sports back
going there is a season
on TV. Yeah. But we've you know, we're very faithful people to our quarterbacks. You know, we haven't had many in the last 20 years, you know, 25 years, and you know, we have a lot of faith in Aaron. And Packer fans are great. You know, they go to the games regardless, you know, of winning and losing, but. You know, we have this window of opportunity to win another Super Bowl, and in some respects, we feel like we might have wasted some opportunities with not putting a lot of defense around him or offense. But yeah, it's a topic of conversation in Wisconsin. Packers
okay, so
2
years.
2 years.
Okay. Like I said, I'm not a sports guy, but I have actually gone to a game at Lambeau, and I get it. Which I don't always like. For example, I've watched a game at Wrigley, and didn't get it. Like it just seemed like an old crappy stadium to me, right? And of course, I work for a Chicago-based company. I probably shouldn't say that, but I just didn't get it. But with Lambeau, I definitely get it, even though it's a small stadium. I definitely get it. So finally, the last question we've asked every guest we've had for a long time is how do you keep yourself productive? What are the main tools you use, and especially nowadays that we're all working from home? How are you keeping yourself productive?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, because it's flipped over. I mean, I've spent my whole life traveling in front of customers, in sales meetings, you know, face to face with people, and it has definitely been a big change of pace. But I can tell you that what I've tried to lean on now is I'm leaning on Zoom a lot, you know, and I'm leaning on Zoom with our clients, because our clients are now getting cameras, where certain insurance companies never allowed certain technology to be available outside their house, right? So, or outside the office. So almost all of our clients have been issued cameras. So we're making it mandatory to get on camera, right? So when we're on camera, so we're not multitasking and we have to stay focused. We use a technology called Slack. Slack is a communication tool that is designed to be somewhat informal and formal. So it's a great way to keep in contact with each other. And you know, and then we've also created water cooler stations. So we have keep stations open all the time from 8 to 7, where people can drop in at the water cooler. And the water cooler is just a spot, like a video spot, where you know, would be walking away from your office to kind of chat, and just make sure that you can stay connected with your clients. But really, at the end of the day, I gotta admit, you know, when I end the day, you know, I'm still trying, you know, I'm like, here's my to-do, right?
You would be surprised. For those listening on the audio version, he lifted his notepad or his nice notepad.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can't
It's
remember
not. It's not like your
Moleskin. Yeah.
what do they call it? It's not like your day timer or whatever the old technology was, but your book. But I obviously still use my all the Outlook tools and the Microsoft tools and 365. But at the end of the day, this is I write down and say, this is what I have to accomplish. This I keep a week list saying I need to keep this done in a week. I keep a priority list because I need to have 3 priorities as opposed to 10, in my opinion. And then I have what I need to do on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So I do it at the end of the day. So it's just a way for me to stay organized, especially in a new year.
Surprised how many leaders of insurtech companies we've asked this question, and like how many of them have ultimately said, I still love my pen and paper, and on top of every other tool, pen and paper ends up being our go-to tool. So that's basically all I have when it comes to questions. If any of our listeners were inspired by what you're doing with Flood and want to reach out, we'll be linking the company's website and your LinkedIn on the show notes. What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, so they can contact me directly. So I'm at rick.tighe@nationalfloodservices.com. So all of ours nationalfloodservices.com. So if you want to get a hold of me directly, they can reach me that way. A great way to get information on NFS is to go to our website. We're continually changing our website, which is www.nationalfloodservices.com. And you can follow us on LinkedIn, follow us on Twitter, and if anyone would want to get a hold of me, they can contact me at that email address.
Awesome, and that's the Tighe, Tighe.
That is correct.
Pronounced
Yes.
Tighe, Rick Tighe. So
yes.
Thank you, Rick, for joining us today. It's great to hear that some innovation is happening in the flood space, which you are right has been largely ignored, probably because of NFIP, right?
Right.
Has been largely ignored by the incredible technology revolution that's hitting our industry. So it's great to know that somebody out there is focusing on making flood better, both for the carriers that write it and for the consumers that we want to make it as easy to buy as possible, because everybody should have flood.
Exactly.
Everybody has some flood risk.
Right.
So everybody should have flood. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much.
Yeah. Hey, Tony, it was really nice meeting you, and thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.